Kai was always a little different from the rest of the kids on his block. Fragile, his mom used to say, though never to his face. He was the kid who caught every cold, who got stomach aches before field trips, who missed more school than anyone else during flu season. By the time he was 12, he'd been tested for everything from food allergies to autoimmune disorders. Nothing ever quite explained why his body seemed so eager to betray him. Family lore said his grandfather was the same way, kept mostly to himself. Quiet, tired all the time, more comfortable tinkering in the garage than dealing with the world. Kai's mother would mention it softly, like she was afraid the comparison might make it true. High school brought brief relief, track gave him structure, friends gave him purpose. But even then, there were weeks when the air felt like syrup and his legs turned to lead. He just pushed through, chalking it up to being overcommitted. College was harder. First came the insomnia, then the classes he stopped going to, the emails from professors he ignored. He blamed homesickness, burnout, whatever sounded believable. When he nearly failed out sophomore year, his advisor suggested maybe he was just under too much stress. "Take care of yourself," she said, as if that were something you could just decide to do. Still, Kai made it through. Got the degree, got the job, got the apartment with the exposed brick wall that he bragged about to friends, and then his mom got sick. The decline was fast, months, not years. He moved back home to take care of her, convinced he could manage it all. Work, bills, her appointments, hospice paperwork, sleepless nights. After she passed, he stayed in the house because moving felt like giving up on her entirely. That's when things really slowed. The mornings felt like trying to climb out from under a wet blanket. Showering was a negotiation. Meals were a hassle. His body hurt constantly, joints aching like he'd run a marathon just getting from bed to the couch. He stopped returning texts. He ignored work calls. Weeks blurred, and yet somehow it still felt like nothing was really happening. Just this quiet, sinking kind of nothingness. Until that night. It was nearly 3 a.m. He hadn't slept, again. Kai sat in the dark kitchen staring at the same spot on the wall where his mom used to hang a calendar. He couldn't even explain why, but there was this sudden, sharp understanding that if he didn't do something, this was going to be his whole life. Or worse, maybe it wouldn't be. The next morning, after ignoring the alarm for the 6th time, Kai opened his laptop and typed into the search bar, "Therapist near me." That was the start. But finding help wasn't as simple as typing "therapist near me" and getting magically fixed. Kai stared at the search results for hours before clicking on anything. Websites blurred together, names, headshots, promises about healing and growth. He kept closing the tabs, convincing himself this was stupid, that he'd get over it, that he'd figure it out on his own. 3 days later, after another sleepless night and the 4th straight day of not showering, he tried again. This time he actually sent an email. A week passed before he got a reply. The first therapist he reached out to wasn't taking new clients. The second never responded at all. By the time Dr. Rhodes's office emailed back, Kai had almost given up. The first session was awkward. The waiting room smelled like peppermint tea, and Kai nearly left twice while filling out the intake paperwork. There was a part of him that felt like an imposter. People who needed therapy were falling apart. He was functioning, technically. But Dr. Rhodes didn't seem to expect some big, dramatic confession. He asked simple questions. "How long have you been feeling this way? How's your sleep? What's your appetite like? Do you ever feel like it's hard to find a reason to get out of bed?" Kai found himself telling the truth. Not all of it, but more than he thought he would. About the exhaustion, about the constant heaviness, about the nights his thoughts spiraled to dark places that scared him. By the 3rd session, Dr. Rhodes brought up something called cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. He explained how it wasn't just about talking but about noticing the loops Kai's mind kept running. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, became a cornerstone of Kai's journey. Dr. Rhodes explained it wasn't just about talking through problems, it was about actively noticing the patterns in Kai's thoughts, the loops his mind kept running. Alongside CBT, they discussed medication. Dr. Rhodes was thorough, explaining the benefits and potential side effects. Kai felt a mix of hope and apprehension, but he knew he needed to try something different. I'm lazy, I'm failing, I'm a burden, nothing will ever get better. These were the thoughts Dr. Rhodes helped Kai to identify. They worked on figuring out where these thoughts came from, why they felt so automatic, and, eventually, how to challenge them, not with fake positivity but with small, concrete evidence that maybe, just maybe, they weren't entirely true. For example, Kai had started telling himself he never did anything anymore, so Dr. Rhodes had him keep a list. Every tiny task he completed: brushed teeth, opened the mail, answered Marla's text, took a 10-minute walk. The goal wasn't to fix everything overnight, it was to disrupt the lie that he was doing nothing, to prove to his own brain that action, even the smallest kind, was possible. By the 6th session, they were setting bigger goals. Shower before noon, cook a real meal, run a mile. But the heaviness, it still lingered. The fog, the bone-deep fatigue, the nights where his brain curled back into those dark places and whispered the same old lies. That's when Dr. Rhodes gently brought up medication. Kai was hesitant. He'd heard the horror stories, personality changes, numbness, side effects that were worse than the original problem. But Dr. Rhodes explained the biology of it. How depression isn't just a mood but a disruption in the brain's neurotransmitters like serotonin. They talked through the options. Eventually, Kai agreed to try sertraline, starting at a low dose. The first 2 weeks were rough. The nausea was no joke. His anxiety spiked before it got better. There were nights he almost quit, thinking maybe this was all a mistake. But Dr. Rhodes had warned him that sometimes things feel worse before they improve, and they checked in weekly to tweak the plan as needed. By the end of the first month, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, not some sudden lightning bolt of happiness, but getting out of bed didn't feel impossible anymore. The constant ache in his chest eased just a little. And combined with the work they were doing in therapy, the gaps between the bad days started to grow. He still tracked his thoughts, still worked on breaking the mental loops, but now, the small victories started stacking up. Applied for partial medical leave from work, took Marla up on her offer to go for coffee, started jogging again just around the block. And the best part, for the first time in months, those victories felt real. Looking back, now, Kai can see how it all wove together. It wasn't just the medication fixing his brain chemistry. It wasn't just CBT teaching him how to disrupt toxic thought patterns. It wasn't just Marla checking in, or Dr. Rhodes listening. It was all of it, tangled up. A body with a family history of fragility, as his mom had called it. A mind weighed down by years of perfectionism, grief, and self-blame. A life thrown off balance by isolation, loss, and silence. Each thread pulling tighter until the whole thing nearly snapped. And now he's learning to stitch it back together slowly, messily, day by day, not perfectly, but enough.